Lami and her daughter Sephu lived in a small town called Nyanda, where the mornings were filled with the smell of roasted corn and the songs of early birds. Their home was small and old, made of mud bricks and a rusty iron roof. Yet they were happy in their little world. Every day mother and daughter would wake before sunrise and walk to the market with baskets full of vegetables they had grown in their small garden. Sephu would call out in her soft voice, "Fresh tomatoes, sweet peppers," and the neighbors smiled kindly at her. Lami worked hard. Life had never been easy for her after Sephu's father passed away when Sephu was only a baby. But she never complained. She taught her daughter to smile through hardship, to give thanks for little things and to never look down on others. The two shared everything, laughter, stories, and dreams. Sometimes when the day ended and they sat outside under the stars, Sephu would whisper, "Mama, do you think our life will ever change?" Lami would smile and say, "Maybe one day, my child. But until then we have love, and that is enough." Then one afternoon as they sat selling vegetables in the marketplace, a shiny black car stopped near their stall. Everyone turned to look. Out stepped a tall, well-dressed man with a gold watch and calm eyes. His name was Mr. Cato, a rich trader from the city who often came to Nyanda to buy goods for his business. He greeted Lami politely and bought almost everything from her stall. But before leaving he said something that stayed in her mind. "You have kind eyes, madam. The city could use more hearts like yours." Days passed and Mr. Cato began visiting often. He always greeted Sephu warmly and praised her for helping her mother. But it was clear that he was more interested in Lami. He brought her small gifts, sugar, rice, and once a pretty scarf. Lami felt shy at first and used to such attention. But soon she found herself smiling when he arrived. Sephu noticed her mother's laughter returning, brighter than before. She was happy to see her mother happy, even though a small worry sat quietly in her heart. After several months, Mr. Cato asked Lami to marry him. "You have worked too hard for too long," he said softly. "Let me take care of you." Lami hesitated. She looked at Sephu and thought of their simple life. "What about my daughter?" she asked. Mr. Cato smiled kindly. "She will be part of our family. You both will live with me." The whole village talked about it. Some said Lami was lucky. Others whispered that rich men change once they get what they want. But Lami, blinded by new hope, chose to believe in love. The wedding was small but beautiful. Sephu watched her mother in a fine dress, her face glowing with joy. For the first time she dreamed of sleeping in a house with electric lights and real windows, not just holes covered with cloth. When they moved into Mr. Cato's big house in the city, everything felt like a dream. The floors were shiny and the walls smelled of new paint. There were many rooms bigger than their old home. Sephu walked around with wide eyes. She thought, this is where happiness lives. For a few days everything was perfect. Mr. Cato was kind and Lami was full of smiles. They ate good food and Sephu wore clean new clothes. But soon things began to change. It started with small things. Lami no longer asked Sephu to sit beside her at dinner. When guests came, she told Sephu to stay in the kitchen. One day a visitor asked, "Who is that girl?" and Lami laughed nervously. "Oh, just someone who helps me around the house." Sephu froze. The words cut through her like a knife. She wanted to believe her mother had spoken in confusion, but it happened again and again. Lami began dressing differently, speaking differently. She no longer talked about the old days in Nyanda. She acted as if she had never known poverty, as if her past was a shadow she wished to forget. Sephu saw the change and felt a growing distance between them. At night, when the house was quiet, she cried into her pillow. She missed her mother's old voice, the one that told her bedtime stories and laughed over simple jokes. One morning Lami called her into the living room. "Sephu," she said, her tone sharp, "from now on, you will help with the housework. You're not a child anymore." Sephu nodded quietly. She didn't argue. She cleaned the rooms, washed the dishes, and served tea to guests. No one knew she was Lami's daughter. To everyone she was just the maid. Sometimes, when she looked at her mother sitting beside Mr. Cato, dressed in fine clothes and smiling proudly, she wondered what had changed her so deeply. Was it love? Or pride? The woman who once taught her about kindness now looked away when Sephu passed by. It was as if Lami had built a wall made of shame and fear, a wall that kept her own daughter out. Still, Sephu kept working quietly. She never shouted or complained. Deep inside, she hoped that one day her mother would remember who she was. But each passing day made that hope smaller. She began to feel invisible, like the dust she wiped from the floor. Mr. Cato noticed the girl's quiet nature, but he never asked many questions. He thought she was just a servant. Only his mother, Mama Zuri, when she visited from another town, noticed the truth hiding behind the silence. She saw how the girl looked at Lami, not with the eyes of a worker but of someone longing for love. But that part of the story was yet to come. For now, Sefu's heart carried the heavy secret of being her mother's hidden child. In the large house that sparkled on the outside, she felt smaller every day. The same home that was supposed to bring them peace had become a place where love was locked away, and Lami had thrown away the key without even realizing it. And though Sefu was still young, she understood something very old, that wealth can buy comfort but never warmth. And that sometimes when people rise too high, they forget who lifted them from the ground. The days in Mr. Kato's mansion moved slowly for Sefu. The house was large, with marble floors that shone like mirrors, and tall windows that let in the bright city sun. But to Sefu it felt empty, too big, too quiet, too cold. She woke up before everyone else, swept the floors, polished the silver dishes, and cooked breakfast for people who barely looked at her. Every morning she saw her mother walking down the stairs in silk dresses, her hair neatly tied, her fingers shining with gold rings. "Good morning, madam," Sefu would whisper softly. But Lami never replied with warmth. She would nod slightly, her eyes sliding away. When visitors came, Sefu had to stand by the door and serve drinks. Once one of the women asked, "Who is this girl? She looks too young to be working so hard." Lami smiled politely and said, "Oh, that's Sefu, my helper. She's from the village." The words hit Sefu like a stone. Helper. For the rest of the evening, she could barely see through her tears as she served food and cleared plates. After the guests left, she went to her small room near the kitchen, the same room where the other servants kept their things. She sat on the small wooden bed, hugging her knees. The laughter from the living room echoed in her ears, but it no longer sounded like her mother's laughter. It belonged to someone else, someone she didn't know. In the following weeks, Lami changed even more. She walked with her head high and talked only about expensive things, jewelry, dresses, parties. She started using words Sefu had never heard before, words that didn't belong to their old life in Nyanda. When people from the village came to visit, she avoided them. "We have moved on," she said once when Sefu asked about an old neighbor. "The past is gone." Mr. Kato noticed the change too, but he thought it was just how rich life made people behave. He didn't know the full truth, that the girl serving food each day was his wife's daughter. Lami never told him. She feared that if he found out, he might think less of her. So she buried her shame and called her child a servant. Sefu tried to understand. She thought maybe her mother was afraid. Maybe she just needed time. But time did not heal anything, it only made the wound deeper. Each day she worked hard. She washed clothes until her fingers wrinkled, scrubbed the kitchen floors until her knees hurt, and carried heavy water buckets without complaint. When she made mistakes, one of the older servants scolded her. Once, she broke a plate and her mother shouted from across the room, "Be careful, Sefu. You can't even do a simple job right." Sefu froze. Her mother's voice sounded sharp and cold, so unlike the gentle tone she once knew. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said before realizing she had said the forbidden word. Lami's eyes turned hard. "Don't call me that in this house," she said quietly. "It's Madame Lami here." That night, Sefu couldn't sleep. She stared at the small window above her bed. The city lights sparkled outside, but they didn't bring her comfort. She remembered their old house in Nyanda, the soft chirping of crickets, the sound of her mother's voice singing as they cooked dinner, the smell of smoke from their small fire. She missed it all, the love, the laughter, the simplicity. Here she had everything she once dreamed of, fine food, nice clothes, a big house, yet she had never felt poorer. The other servants liked her because she never complained. "You are different," said Amari, an older maid who worked there for years. "You don't act proud like the others." Sefu smiled weakly. "Maybe because I know how it feels to have nothing," she said. One afternoon, when Lami's friends came over for lunch, Sefu served them fresh fruit. The women talked loudly, their bracelets jingling as they laughed. One of them pointed at Sefu and said, "That girl looks just like you when you were young, Lami." Everyone laughed, but Lami's smile faded for a second. "Nonsense," she said quickly. "She's just from the same region. That's why." Sefu pretended not to hear, but inside, her heart ached. She wanted to run to her mother, to hug her and say, "I am your daughter, why do you hide me?" But she didn't. She knew what would happen. Lami would scold her again, maybe even send her away. So she stayed silent, swallowing her pain like bitter medicine. Sometimes Mr. Kato's mother, Mama Zuri, came to visit. She was old and wise, with eyes that seemed to see through everything. She noticed how Sefu served quietly, never sitting to eat, never smiling much. Once she called her over and said, "You have gentle hands, child. Who are your parents?" Sephew hesitated, unsure of what to say. I'm from Nianda," she whispered. The old woman nodded slowly, watching her closely. That evening Mama Zuri watched how Lami scolded Sephew for being too slow. She said nothing then, but her mind began to wonder. There was something strange about the way Lami avoided the girl's eyes, something unnatural in how Sephew looked at her. A look full of love and pain mixed together. Meanwhile, Sephew's heart grew heavier each day. Sometimes she sat by herself in the garden when everyone slept. The moonlight touched her face softly as she whispered, "Mama, do you still love me?" The night never answered. Only the wind carried her words away. Her hope began to fade. She stopped expecting kindness and worked like a shadow in her own mother's home. But deep inside, a small spark remained, a memory of her mother's old smile, the one that told her everything would be all right. Sephew didn't know it yet, but that spark would one day change everything. For now, she carried it quietly, hidden behind her tired eyes. That afternoon, the mansion was bright with noise. Lami's husband, Mr. Cato, had gone to the market and his mother, Mama Zuri, had arrived for a visit. Everyone in the house hurried to make things perfect. The servants cleaned every corner and Lami wore her finest blue dress. Sephew worked in silence, her hands moving quickly as she arranged flowers on the table. When Mama Zuri entered the house, everyone bowed politely. She was old but strong, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She hugged her son's wife gently and smiled. "You look well, Lami," she said kindly. "This house shines brighter than before." Lami laughed softly, proud of the compliment. "Thank you, Mama Zuri. It is all by God's grace." But Mama Zuri's eyes wandered to Sephew, who stood quietly in the corner holding a tray of fruit. The girl looked tired but calm. There was something about her face, the shape of her nose, the curve of her lips, that made Mama Zuri pause. She looked so much like Lami, she thought. Throughout the day Mama Zuri watched closely. Whenever Lami gave orders, the girl obeyed quickly. Whenever guests spoke rudely, she smiled without anger. She moved with grace, like someone raised with love, not like a servant. It puzzled the old woman deeply. During lunch, Lami and her friends chatted about clothes and money. Sephew moved around the table, refilling glasses and serving food. At one point, a guest said with a laugh, "This young maid looks almost like your reflection, Lami. Are you sure she's not family?" The women laughed. Lami's face stiffened for a second, then she replied lightly, "Oh, she's from Nianda. Maybe that's why she looks a bit like me. The people there share the same features." Mama Zuri didn't laugh. She saw the quick fear in Lami's eyes, the kind of fear that hides truth. Later that evening, after the visitors left and the house grew quiet, Mama Zuri asked for a cup of tea. Sephew brought it to her room, bowing politely. "Thank you, child," the old woman said. "Sit with me a moment. You must be tired." Sephew froze. No one ever asked her to sit. "I'm fine, madam," she said softly. "I should go finish the dishes." "Nonsense," Mama Zuri said kindly. "Sit." Sephew hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair. The lamp light fell on her face and Mama Zuri studied her quietly. "Tell me," she began gently, "how long have you been here?" Sephew looked down. "Almost 1 year, madam." "And before that?" "I lived in Nianda with my mother," Sephew said softly. "We sold vegetables by the roadside." Mama Zuri smiled a little. "Nianda? That's a long way. Did your mother send you here to work?" Sephew's hands trembled. She didn't want to lie, but she was afraid. She had promised her mother never to reveal their secret. Yet looking into the kind old woman's eyes, something inside her broke. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "She didn't send me," Sephew whispered. "She brought me." Mama Zuri frowned gently. "Brought you? What do you mean, child?" Sephew bit her lip, her voice shaking. "Madam Lami, she is my mother." The room went still. The sound of the crickets outside seemed to grow louder. For a moment Mama Zuri said nothing. Her wise eyes softened, full of sorrow and disbelief. "Your mother?" she repeated slowly. "Are you certain?" Sephew nodded. "Yes, madam. She was kind before. But when she married Mr. Cato, everything changed. She told me to call her madam, not mother. She said no one must know." The tears streamed down her cheeks now. "I try to be good, but she doesn't even look at me. She says I will shame her. I just wanted her to love me again." Mama Zuri's heart ached. She reached out and took the girl's hand. "Oh, child," she whispered. "You have carried too much pain for someone so young." She sighed deeply, her heart heavy with both anger and sadness. She asked softly, Does my son know? Sephu shook her head. No, madam. She told me never to tell him. I do not want to cause trouble. Mama Zuri looked out the window for a moment, thinking of her son, a good man who worked hard and trusted his wife. He would be heartbroken to know this secret. But even worse, she thought, was how much pain this innocent girl had suffered. That night, Mama Zuri sat alone long after Sephu went to bed. The truth had opened before her like a wound. She remembered when Lami first married her son, humble, soft-spoken, grateful. How quickly pride had changed her. The woman who once spoke gently of her daughter now treated her as a burden. Mama Zuri prayed quietly. God, show me the right way to open her eyes. The next morning at breakfast she watched Lami closely. The woman smiled brightly, pretending nothing was wrong. She talked about new clothes, new friends, new parties. But Mama Zuri saw past the shine. Behind the painted smile she saw fear, the fear of being found out. After breakfast she called her son outside for a short walk. Kato, she said carefully, you trust your wife, don't you? Yes, Mama, he replied. Why? She has a girl working in your house. Do you know where she came from? Lami said she's from the village, a helper. Why? Mama Zuri didn't answer right away. She looked toward the garden where Sephu was sweeping. The sunlight touched the girl's face and the truth burned in her heart again. Kato, she said softly, open your eyes. Some truths hide in plain sight. Her son looked confused, but before he could ask more, Lami appeared. Mama, is everything all right? She asked, smiling nervously. You look worried. Mama Zuri smiled faintly. Everything is fine, my dear. I just think it's time we talked as a family. That evening the house was quiet again. Sephu stayed in her room, heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew that the truth had escaped her lips, and nothing would ever be the same. As she lay on her small bed, she whispered to herself, maybe it's better this way. Maybe someone will finally see me. The stars outside shone gently through her small window, as if whispering hope to her tired heart. Somewhere deep inside she felt that something was about to change, something that might finally bring her back the love she had lost. The sun rose slowly over Nyanda, painting the mansion walls in soft gold. But inside the air felt heavy. Everyone in the house could sense something different that morning. The servants whispered quietly, wondering why Mama Zuri had called everyone to the sitting room. Even Lami, who was usually calm and proud, felt her hands tremble as she poured herself a cup of tea. Sephu stood near the doorway, her heart beating fast. She hadn't slept all night. Her mind kept replaying the words she had said to Mama Zuri, the truth she could no longer hide. Now she didn't know what would happen. Would her mother send her away? Would Mr. Kato hate her? She wished she could disappear. When everyone gathered, Mama Zuri stood tall in the middle of the room. She looked calm, but her eyes were sharp, full of the strength that came from years of wisdom. Mr. Kato sat beside her, confused but patient, waiting for her to speak. Lami stood across the room trying to smile, though fear flickered in her eyes. My children, Mama Zuri began softly, I did not call this meeting for anger but for truth. The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. Sephu lowered her head, holding the edge of her dress tightly. Mama Zuri turned to Lami. Yesterday I spoke with the girl who works in this house, she said slowly, and I learned something that should never have been hidden. Lami's breath caught. Mama, she said quickly, please? But the old woman raised her hand gently. Lami, she said, her voice calm but firm, you have forgotten who you are. No mother should hide her own child. The words echoed in the room like thunder. Everyone froze. Mr. Kato's eyes widened as he looked from his wife to Sephu. What does she mean? He asked, his voice quiet but full of shock. Lami's lips trembled. She tried to speak but her voice broke. Tears filled her eyes. I was afraid, she whispered. I thought if you knew you would think less of me. I was poor and I didn't want my past to follow me here. Mr. Kato stared at her for a long moment. And so you turned your daughter into a maid? He asked softly, pain in his eyes. Lami's tears fell freely now. I was wrong, she said. I told myself it was for her own good, that she would learn to be strong. But truly I was ashamed. I wanted to fit into this rich world and I forgot what really matters. Mama Zuri stepped closer, her voice full of sorrow. Child, wealth can cover the body but it cannot clean the heart. You have let pride blind you to love. The world may respect you for your clothes, but heaven sees how you treat your own blood. Lami fell to her knees. Forgive me, she cried. I have sinned against my own child. Sephu stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what to do. For so long she had dreamed of this moment, her mother seeing her, calling her daughter again, but now it felt too heavy to bear. Slowly she took a step forward. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't hate you. I just wanted you to love me like before." Lami looked up, her face wet with tears. She reached out her hands. "Sephu, my child," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you. I always have. I only lost my way." The room was silent except for quiet sobs. Mr. Cato walked over and placed a hand on Lami's shoulder. "Love and respect cannot grow from lies," he said gently. "But truth, even when painful, can heal what pride has broken." Mama Zuri smiled softly and stood between them. She reached for Sephu's hand and guided her toward her mother. "You are part of this family now," she said warmly. "No one will ever call you a servant again." Sephu looked at her grandmother's kind face and then at her mother's trembling hands. Slowly she bent down and hugged Lami. For a moment both cried, mother and daughter, broken by guilt, joined again by love. Mr. Cato's eyes softened as he watched them. "This home is large," he said, "but it was empty without truth. Let us start again." The servants, who had been standing quietly at the edges, wiped their eyes. They had seen many things in this house: pride, anger, silence, but never something as powerful as this moment of forgiveness. Later that day the house felt different. The air was lighter. The walls, which once seemed cold, now felt warm again. Lami asked Sephu to sit with her for lunch, something she had not done since they arrived in the mansion. At first, Sephu hesitated, unsure if it was real. But Mama Zuri nodded at her encouragingly. "Go, child," she said. "A mother's heart has found its way home." As they ate together, Lami looked at her daughter again and again, as if trying to remember every detail of her face. "You've grown so strong," she said softly. "Stronger than I ever was." Sephu smiled shyly. "I had to be," she said. "But I'm happy now." That night, Lami went to Mama Zuri's room. She knelt beside her and said, "Thank you for opening my eyes. I almost lost the only gift God ever gave me." Mama Zuri touched her shoulder gently. "Do not thank me," she said. "Thank the child who still had love in her heart after all your cruelty. That kind of love can heal even the hardest heart." Lami nodded, tears returning to her eyes. She realized how foolish she had been, how easily pride had taken over her soul. She promised herself that from that day she would be the mother Sephu deserved. Down the hall, Sephu sat by the window looking at the stars. For the first time in a long while, her heart felt light. She heard her mother's footsteps behind her and turned. Lami stood there holding a small blanket, the one Sephu had used when she was a baby. "I kept it all these years," Lami said softly. "I just didn't have the courage to face what it reminded me of." Sephu took it gently and smiled. "Then let it remind you now, not of shame but of love." They stood together side by side, the pain between them slowly melting away. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of a new beginning. Days turned into weeks and weeks slowly became months. The mansion that once echoed with pride and silence now began to feel alive again. Lami was not the same woman she had been. Something deep inside her had changed. The pride that had once filled her heart had turned into regret, and that regret slowly grew into love. Every morning she woke up early, long before the servants. She would walk into the kitchen quietly and help Sephu with breakfast. At first, Sephu tried to stop her. "Mama, you don't have to do this," she said softly. But Lami would shake her head and smile. "I must," she would reply. "My hands forgot what real work feels like." It's time they remembered. The first few days were awkward. Lami was not used to cutting vegetables or carrying heavy pots anymore. She burned her fingers a few times and spilled flour on her fine dress, but she only laughed at herself. Sephu watched her with surprise. This was not the proud woman who had once called her a servant. This was her real mother, the one who used to sing to her while selling vegetables in Nianda. Sometimes while they cooked together, Lami would tell Sephu stories from her younger days, about how she met Sephu's father, how they struggled but stayed strong, how they dreamed of a better life. Sephu listened quietly, her heart slowly softening. She could see how her mother was trying, truly trying, to make things right again. In the afternoons, Lami would walk through the garden, helping the workers plant flowers. She spoke kindly to them and they smiled when she passed. Mr. Cato watched her from the veranda, proud of the woman she was becoming. "You've changed," he told her one evening as they sat together under the sunset. Lami looked at him, her eyes soft and full of humility. "I lost myself for a while," she said. but Mama Zuri helped me find the way back. Mr. Kato nodded. Sometimes the road back home is longer than the one we take to leave it, he said gently. That night, Lami went to Sephu's room. She knocked softly and entered. Sephu was sitting by the window sewing a small piece of cloth. The moonlight touched her face, making her look older and wiser than her years. My daughter, Lami said quietly. Sephu looked up. The word daughter still made her heart flutter. Yes, Mama, she replied. Lami walked closer and sat beside her. For a long moment she said nothing. Then in a trembling voice she spoke. I have done many wrong things. I hurt you when I should have protected you. I let pride guide me when love should have been my compass. I do not ask you to forget, but I ask you to forgive. Sephu looked at her mother, at the wrinkles of sorrow around her eyes, at the trembling hands that once held her as a child. Then she smiled, a small warm smile that reached her eyes. Mama, she said softly, I forgave you the day you called me your daughter again. Lami gasped and tears filled her eyes. She reached out and hugged her tightly. You are my light, she whispered. I will never hide you again. Outside, the night wind moved gently through the trees, and the moon shone bright as if blessing their moment. The next morning, Mama Zuri sat in the garden, watching them both prepare breakfast together. Her eyes twinkled with quiet joy. When Lami brought her a bowl of porridge, Mama Zuri took her hand and said, You see, my child, wealth means nothing if the heart is poor. Lami nodded, her voice full of emotion. I understand that now, Mama. I almost lost everything that mattered. Mama Zuri smiled wisely. Now you have learned the greatest lesson, that love is the true treasure. From that day peace returned to the house. The servants laughed freely again. The air was filled with the smell of food, music and warmth. Sephu went back to school, and Lami proudly introduced her as her daughter wherever they went. Sometimes, people whispered about the strange story of the woman who once hid her own child. But Lami no longer cared. She had made peace with her past. Whenever she heard such talk, she would simply smile and say, Yes, I made mistakes. But my daughter taught me what real love looks like. One evening, the family sat together under the mango tree in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and gold. Mr. Kato held Mama Zuri's hand as Sephu leaned against her mother's shoulder. Birds chirped above them and laughter filled the air. Lami looked at her daughter and said softly, Do you remember the small house in Nianda? Sephu nodded. Yes, Mama. I remember the smell of roasted corn and the sound of the market. Lami smiled. We had little but we had peace. I thought I lost that when I married into wealth. But now I see, peace is not in the size of the house or the weight of gold. It's in the love we give. Mama Zuri chuckled softly. You speak wisely now, Lami. Perhaps one day you will teach other women the same. Lami laughed through her tears. Maybe I will. But for now, I just want to be a good mother. As the stars began to appear, the family sat in silence, feeling the calm that comes after a long storm. The house behind them, once cold and full of pride, now felt alive, warm, loving and true. That night, Sephu prayed before bed. She thanked God for forgiveness, for love, and for the chance to see her mother's heart heal. In her dream, she saw her mother smiling in the old market of Nianda, selling vegetables, laughing like before. And when she woke up, she heard her mother humming the same tune she used to sing long ago, the song of simple joy, the song of peace that had finally returned to their lives. From that day on, the mansion of Mr. Kato was not known for its riches or fine clothes. It was known as the house where love lived again, the house where a mother found her way back to her daughter, and a family found its heart. And in every sunrise that touched the walls of that home, there was a quiet promise, that love, once lost, could always be found again.